Hey, and welcome to Broker Tools, where we unpack the tools, systems, and strategies that help brokers optimize the way they work. I'm Katie, your host, and today we are diving into one of my favorite topics, automations and AI. Joining me for this conversation is Simone from LiquidX. Together, we are breaking down how automated workflows and AI can stream lead management, client communication, follow-ups, and internal processes without overcomplicating your tool stack. If you've ever felt buried in admin, juggling too many systems, or unsure where AI actually fits into your business, this conversation will give you practical, real-world ways to work smarter, not harder. Welcome to the pod, Simone.
Hi, Katie. Thanks for having me.
You are most welcome. I guess before we get into having all things automations, which we will probably very much hard nerd out on, and we might be good for people to have a little bit of background on you and understand how did you come here? What was your story to get to even into this space?
Yeah, so I started my career about 30 years ago as a data-driven marketer. It was back in the day where direct marketing was king, and followed the rise of, after the dot-com boom, into digital. Spent a lot of time, back in those early days building databases, and then with the rise of predictive modeling and things like that, worked a lot in that space with a lot of my clients. I was privileged enough to lead some globally awarded agencies in the digital data and customer experience space. And then over the last 8 years, I've been independent, working with my own consultancy called LiquidX. And that is really focused on helping clients apply data and technology to solve business problems, starting from marketing through to, as you mentioned, process automations as well.
Nice. And I guess because we are in industry, those kinds of words mean a lot to us, but some people have no idea like how technology and data actually influences their I guess day-to-day life. Are you able to give it I guess more simple terms? I'm not sure if that's the right languaging for it, but a guide as to what that actually means to somebody who may not have experience in marketing.
Yeah, well, if you think about all your prospective clients, your current clients, and your past clients, there's a whole heap of data involved in that. Some of that data will be the details of their name, email, etc. That's all their personally identifiable information. You may have some more sensitive information once they're actually in active broking sense of having identity checks and those sorts of things. That's when we get into more sensitive data that you're holding. So the ability to think about how you hold that data, where you hold it, how you activate it in the right way, and how you use digital systems to help take the load off the team. I think we'll talk today about AI agents. And most people have probably had an experience of an AI chat interface, like a Microsoft Copilot or ChatGPT, maybe a Claude or a Perplexity or Gemini. Those interfaces are great for a conversation via chat, but an AI agent is quite different. So I think it's shifting that mindset of having a sense of tools and systems in your business through to having digital workers that actually are a digital workforce in your business.
Yes, and I guess from your kind of work experience, if we were to explain it a little bit more, it's this part where when a person comes to you to say, hey, I want to get a loan, for example, because obviously we're talking to brokers, that person comes with their own mindset, their own background, their own gender, their own career. They have a lot of personal details, and there's this part that has to collect these details because that matters in marketing as we go further, and it matters for onboarding, and it matters for qualifications. And so what you're saying is you're getting this human and extracting as much information so that you can make all these other business decisions down the track. And whether you use AI chatbots or AI conversational bots, or even just a CRM to capture all of that information. That is what you do, is making sure that we collect the right data at the right time throughout the process.
Exactly. Yeah. And a CRM is foundational to actually holding that information and enabling the client-facing teams to use that information. And I guess the evolution that we're seeing is that a client-facing team might include a digital worker being an AI agent as well.
Yeah. And I guess when it comes to AI agents and automations and AI, maybe we should break down the three components of it. I think I've summarized it into three components. You could probably say it's different, but they each have their own framework and the way they work. What would you say it is for you?
Well, I think the difference when you've got a chat interface is that it is responding to the input you're giving it, and it's giving you a response. An AI agent is different because what it's doing is you're actually empowering it. You're giving it agency. In essence, you're giving it authority to take action and to act on your behalf, just like you would if you employed a person. You're giving them authority to act on behalf of the business. So in essence, an AI agent has autonomy to take actions. Now, there's degrees of this, because if you look in the marketplace at the tools and systems that are available, some people will class an AI agent as something very simple, whereas other people might class it as a sequence of agentic workflows versus really an autonomous worker, a digital worker. So there's degrees of that. And we can talk about each of those. Maybe some people have had experience using, say, in ChatGPT, you could build a little GPT bot for yourself, and it's got a focus. You've grounded it in some knowledge about your business, and you're actually, for example, teaching it how to write in the same tone of voice that you would write. That might be a really simple bot, but that's not really an agent. An agent is taking action. So if we were to think about examples, it might be that in an agentic workflow, it's actually a sequence of tasks. So think about in your CRM, you can create workflows which are triggered by certain data events. So it might be that you've got a large language model, an AI model involved in that automation sequence. So let's talk about an example. Say in this call right now, if you're a broker, and I've recently been going through this experience of downsizing my property, so selling, buying, and in that we have a fact-finding call. You're understanding my needs, where I'm up to in the process. You might have an AI involved in that call, listening, recording, transcribing, then summarizing, and then putting notes back into the CRM. So that's a basic example of a starting point. It may then have an agentic workflow to say, okay, follow up with Simone and send her a thank you email and tell her the next steps. The second step might be schedule a reminder call back in my diary. The next step might be that it's actually pulling a process document out of a certain system. So you can have these agentic workflows which are actually sequenced. That's very different to then where we're seeing things going for the future, is that you would say, okay, welcome my personal assistant into the room. And you don't have to give those sequences. They are autonomously understanding the steps. So let's take an example of, you might have one client who is very much wanting to meet, but can't do so because they work in the city. So you have to actually go and find somewhere to meet near their work office. An autonomous agent would be able to go and search the locations, find a reasonable cafe, actually make a booking in the cafe for you, and then send a calendar invite out to both parties, text you both with a reminder, the client and the broker with a reminder and a map link the morning of. So it might come up with those for one client, but for another client, it might recognize that this particular person lives close to your office and they like to come into the office. So it might even have autonomy to do a phone call to that client directly and say, oh, we want to schedule a time. Can we align diaries and book the time that way? So the same agent having autonomy to work in different ways rather than a sequence workflow. So there's different levels of what you might class an AI agent as.
Yes, and I think that is kind of a clear point, because if we think about a whole workflow, a calendar booking going straight into your CRM and just confirming an appointment with an email, that would be a basic automation. That doesn't even require AI at all. It's just a simple automation workflow that you have sequenced together manually through your own thing. The part that can be AI is that it might notice that somebody has changed the appointment, and it's one will create a conversational part around that, because if they just cancel it, you don't know, this is like that crossover where it could be automated like a normal automation versus an AI automation. AI is probably the part is what I would call conversational, or it changes how you present it per person, because when you do a normal automation, it's kind of like a set template along the sequence, and then you can make it AI where you have a set template but you feed it into AI to make it conversational. So instead of going, hi, such and such a name, you could actually extract some data out of your CRM about the person and go, I noticed that you prefer to have a coffee at such and such. Can I, like, that's the AI component. I know it sounds weird, but I'm breaking it down because people may not understand the difference between an automation, which we're calling a basic sequence of events, versus an AI automation versus an AI chat, and then all the other
and
good features.
The final area being an actual autonomous agent, which is a digital worker. So in the example that you gave, we're using in a CRM, it might be called an automation workflow. In some enterprise levels, they call it robotic process automation. And basically, just imagine that in that workflow, however you've sequenced it, you might have a large language model and AI playing a certain conversational role, as you said. It can play other roles than just conversation. And this is where you start to flip into the types of actions that you might want it to take. So where the technology is going is really interesting with computer using agents. So what they do differently to what we've just been talking about is that they actually open up on your desktop a computer environment and can use a mouse. So let's say they're great for booking travel, for example, and you give it a particular outcome you want it to achieve, but you don't tell it the sequence, you don't tell it the steps. It figures that out itself. So let's bring it back to an example. When we bought our house recently, we wanted to build a deck out the back. So I asked the agent to go and find some local builders that would specialize in decks, and it would then fill in the form on the builder's website and make a request for a quote. So I don't have to fill in the form, and different websites have got different forms, so it can navigate that. So this is where we're entering a very different world of your clients having personal assistants who are agents, and also businesses such as the brokers having digital workers who are agents. And I would say that it's still very early days for that. If you know, in working in practical senses with clients, it's very much about saying start simple. Just look at where we can apply some basics. Automation, as you said, can have a really big impact on a business and help a lot. and then having some very safe and low risk ways of applying AI into an agentic flow versus what we just talked about, computer using agents. That it, like, they are here now, you can play with them, but would you apply it in a business context? I would say it's still a bit early days right now.
Yeah, and I know from some of the conversations I've had, obviously between CRMs and aggregator software, that's usually the biggest headache. So most people are having to manually type in whatever they've got in their CRM and transfer it over to the aggregator software. And a few of us have tried to look at this whole agentic workflow, but it's one of those processes that obviously needs to be taken care of with care because of the type of data that is managed.
Completely. So if we were to talk about the steps that a business would go through in order to consider where automation and AI can play a role in their business, you really should start with the strategic experience design. So firstly, thinking about what do you want your clients to feel and experience as part of the process? Where are those moments that matter for human engagement and relationship building versus automation and having a more distant experience? And it doesn't mean it can't be personalized, but you know, when you've got a face-to-face conversation happening, that's very different to having just emails back and forward and texts and things like that, or an AI actually calling that you would have disclosed that it's not human. But the opportunity that each business has is to decide, well, how do you want the steps in your process throughout not just lead generation, but throughout the actual mortgage process, having all, you talk a lot about systems and people and processes in your podcast, Katie. So, you know, if you can define that for your people, then you can define it for automation and agentic workflows and eventually AI agents. So, you know, what happens for us on the other side are clients that are thinking, oh, it's been 10 years since I bought and sold. I can't even remember how to do it anymore. You know, what's conditional approval? When do I get formal approval? How do all of these things happen? What's the order? When do I get a solicitor involved? Is it a conveyancer? How does all of this work? And telling you 10 years ago when we did it last, it was very different. There was not a lot of digital automation involved in the process. But this time around, and you know, shout out to Alex Lambros from Loan Market, and shout out to the urban conveyancing team that we used, because they brought digital aspects into the process. And you can only do that when you really understand the experience you're wanting to give the actual end client. So start with the experience you're wanting to design, and then think about where you want an automation to go. So it has to start with that. The second step, if you are thinking about automation, would then be, well, what opportunities are there? There might be pain points for the team. There might be places where they're finding we're getting bogged down, it's slow, we're getting a lot of repetitive tasks, paperwork, those sorts of things that could be automated through process automation. So look at the pain points for your internal team and the pain points for your clients as well. And sometimes we might not realize those pain points for clients are even there because you're so into your world, you understand the whole process so clearly, but for somebody who hasn't done it for 10 years, they might need more hand-holding, more education, but the team don't have time to give that. But you could set up automations, you could set up some AI support to actually give greater hand-holding. That increases the experience that they're going to have. So all of that is the starting point, and then you'd think about risks. So what risks are involved? You don't want to go to market with automations that are going to create risks in your business.
Correct. And I guess I love like looking at that whole workflow, because everything does start right from that beginning. Because where you had a certain mindset, and everybody comes in with their own mindset, what they do or don't know when they're coming for a loan. And whether you set up your own knowledge base or tap into someone else's knowledge base, but you're giving that warm customer feeling, as in informing them along the way what to expect. It really helps what we call a frictionless process. And
Yeah.
that's what you're trying to really build in. And it's not only reducing friction for your client, but also reducing friction for yourself, because you have so much to do in this process. So by doing the both at the same time, it it creates these big wins.
Yeah, it can be, and it can be big wins. I think if you've done the pain point analysis and the experience design, and then you're looking, where do you want humans to really be that really strong emotional touch point? You're building a relationship versus where can we automate? Then you've got to do that risk analysis. So where would it be absolutely devastating if it went wrong? Where have we got much higher risk in things like identity verification and those sorts of things? Like, where are you willing to hand over authority to an AI or to an automation? And knowing underpinning all of that, we have to be really conscious, of course, of data privacy. So even if you're just using some of the systems you may have right now, like ChatGPT or Copilot, Gemini, Claude, etc., if you're putting your clients' details into those systems, you want to be really sure that you've got training switched off, that you're not training the underlying model. You know that you are not sending that data anywhere. There's not going to be any data leakage. That you're actually abiding by the commitments that you've made through your data privacy statements. So there's a whole heap of things to consider around data privacy. And of course, once you've captured that data, you need to be able to protect it, knowing how long you're keeping it for, what your deletion protocols are, whether you've got the right security involved. And the moment we introduce AI into the mix, that can introduce another aspect of cybersecurity issues. So you do have to be very considered in where that risk lies. And I would always advise people to be looking at starting with low risk things, thinking about how they can increase and upskill the capability within the business before trying to go too far.
Yeah. And I think maybe it'll be helpful for us to kind of go through maybe a front to end look at what that could look like, because it will probably give a bit more practical real world information. So most times, obviously, a simple calendar, that's an easy automation straight out of the bag. And an email follow-up, simple. It then goes straight into a CRM. Where would you introduce AI into this process at this point?
So it may be that you've had a conversation with the client and you need AI to summarize that conversation. So instead of having to write the notes after the meeting into the CRM, it can actually write those notes for you and summarize them. You may decide in that process that you want to have it approved by an internal team member or by the person who took the call, or checked, rather than just automatically published. So there's certain steps you may take in between there as well, because once that information is logged in there, it can then be used in follow-up communications. So write an email to Simone about these next steps. If that initial information that's been logged in the CRM from the call is not right, then it's going to use that information to then have in the email. So, in just a very simple sequence of having a call, setting a meeting, having a call, writing some notes, then doing some follow-up communications, there can be risk involved. So how do you minimize that risk?
Yes, and so because you've now gathered some of the data and you've pulled it into the CRM, and we always want to make sure that you have a CRM because it will always be your source of truth as you go on. And this is where you're saying making sure that the AI has summarized correctly, because again, it is your source of truth, and bad data means bad information.
Yeah, 100%. And when we talk about data readiness, so having worked in the property side of things, in the real estate side of things, often the data that's in systems, in prop tech systems, is not orientated by the client, it's orientated by the property. And that can be problematic when you're talking about having into, say, this world where brokers, it's about the individual who's going for the loan, not the property. But having data connected and knowing where the data is actually integrated from different prop tech systems, where it's actually recognizing that this is the same Simone. The Simone that I talked to over that personal Gmail versus that business email is the same person. Those sorts of really simple things, and that data readiness, that Simone can have multiple properties, or that Simone has previously lived in this property and is looking to buy this property. Having all of that in a structured data way is really important. So even though large language models can use unstructured data, they're very good at unstructured data. And by unstructured data, I mean conversations or pictures, voice, those sorts of things. It can use unstructured data. But if you're thinking about activating agents and automations and workflows, you still need that structured data. So your point about the CRM, Katie, is really key because you still need that system.
Yeah, and as you were talking through, I realized that this is where AI agents, particularly in a mortgage broking business, can be more powerful because you know your client more than anybody else, and you will have great data. And you'll also know that when they're on the ready to look for the next property, if they're an investor type personality. And because you've extracted all that data, if you have the right kind of AI agent set up within your system, they can start looking for property for your client, which will help you, expand your.
I mean, what a great use case. So you may look at the whole end-to-end process of how you can build a relationship over time with an audience. And if that particular client is identified as a potential investor, for example, then yes, being able to expand services into property finding, how can you use digital innovations like that to deliver a particular service? Love it. Love it.
Yeah.
And we'll see that those things that might have felt a little bit in the past, that would have felt like hard. Oh, how do I set up a whole separate side to the business or a new product stream? What we are seeing is that AI is helping create superpowers for teams to actually be able to do things that might have been out of their reach in the past. So basic CRM systems are enabling the tracking of people's behavior when they open emails, when they visit your site, when they're starting to warm up again, and you might say, oh, hey, it's time to reach out and have a conversation with that person because it's giving these data signals back in. We're seeing that the opportunity to create little mini apps because AI can do the coding for you, and to actually look, you wouldn't trust it on its own. You still need to have that risk analysis and cybersecurity in mind and all that sort of thing. But there are platforms that are helping enable that in an end-to-end way where there's hosting, secure hosting, and all those sorts of things so you can integrate in. Those sorts of things might have taken a lot longer in the past to actually set up as solutions and been out of reach for small and medium-sized businesses and only accessible to enterprise.
Yeah. I particularly love BotPress for those types of things. I've found it to be one of those great, I say low cost, depending on where you are on the scale of what you need to do. But it it different, like, as in we can talk about all the different types of bots out there, but because it's not the same as ManyChat. ManyChat is a different kind of service where it's more about marketing to people, and people can think about all these different bots. What do they do? How do they do that? But what you were talking about is like a safe environment where you can store your own information and have it self-hosted so that this is a protection mechanism.
Yeah, that you would have the application layer hosted separate to the CRM still holding all your data. So how you construct that tech stack is important. Some people might be using, for example, Salesforce that's got Agentforce built into it.
That's true.
You've got things like BotPress, as you said, Mind Studio. If you're using the Microsoft environment, they've got Copilot Studio that can then integrate through. There's Australian success stories as well called Relevance AI, and that actually is more about creating a digital workforce. And, if at large enterprise level, you're looking at quite different robotic process automation like Blue Prism, Pega, ServiceNow, those sorts of things. But depending on the skills that you've got within the team, some of these environments are quite low code now. So they allow for the business user who understands the process to actually create the solution rather than needing somebody who can code. But you do usually need somebody who's going to have an eye over the technical integrations, absolutely critical, and making sure there's no security vulnerabilities.
Completely. And I was going to go down another rabbit hole, but I might hold that thought. Only because I feel like part of us is jumping from one place to another, and I think it would be good to kind of smooth out things because everything from I guess an onboarding process, you kind of start with the conversation, then you go in through to having these agentic workflows, which then hopefully can enable other aspects. But where I think it would be also great to talk about is some of the risks. Maybe if you've had any war stories of some of the things that have happened with AI, and how we should really go in when we do these types of things. How do we do that consideration layer?
Yeah, I think even before we talk about automations and digital workforces and AI agents, if anyone is using a basic chat interface, an AI interface, there needs to be a level of AI literacy in understanding what it's good at, what it's not good at, how it works, and where those vulnerabilities might be. Because the vulnerabilities aren't always around, oh, I haven't published this as a interface for my clients and therefore, there's no risk. There's still inherent risk in using AI around bias, around including personally identifiable information, data leakage, the ability to just understand where it might hallucinate and come up with answers that are completely incorrect. So really thinking about the basic level of AI literacy that your business has. And I find that quite often before going into strategic use of AI to even talk about risks, we have to go back to AI literacy as a starting point. Because if we're talking about how certain elements of a large language model works, and we have to spend the time explaining how that works instead of the inherent risk that comes from that, we have to go back to base AI literacy. So I would say that that's always the first starting point, is to think about how you can increase the literacy amongst the team and then work with people who can actually then help you identify where those risks might be. So yeah, if we're going right out to having AI agents that have autonomous abilities and control. It's a very different risk level to using some AI in your business to write some copy, for example. And it's risk is not like black and white. It's a gradient of many different levels. So depending on what you've got connected, how it's being used, can impact the risks.
Yeah, and de-risking, even using AI to de-risk as a process. I mean, I know the guys, I think at Docs AI, they have a great system around doing like data extraction and I call it blocking of information. So say, for example, a document comes through and it's a tax file document, but you're not supposed to obviously submit the tax file number. It has a way to, remove
redact
or redact. That's the word I was looking for. And only store what is needed as a result of that. And so
100%. And I would say that in the legal environment, there's, and I've seen one Australian technology that was actually finding a way to overcome that redaction. So it's great to hear that you've seen another example, because the problem is as soon as the document is held anywhere, it's held. And then the redaction happens. But it's the point in which it's held where the vulnerability sits. So even if ultimately it's still then redacted and in your system with that redaction, there is a point in the process where you've got that vulnerability. And that's a really important part to think about. It's a great example. It's very important for the legal industry to be thinking about that. But certainly in this space with brokers, you're taking documents. You might have solicitors and conveyancers that are in between taking other documents as well, but you do hold a lot of information. You want to make sure that you're not able to be hacked. The data breach notification scheme is a really important thing for all businesses to be aware of. If you haven't done a scenario plan where what happens if you have a cyber breach, what happens if you have a data breach, you need to be ready with a complete plan, a response plan to be able to respond to that, because all these businesses are holding quite sensitive information.
Holding sensitive data and managing that, it is a whole process. And I'm sure you and I could talk about all of these aspects and so many more. But I think we should maybe round out the conversation as to how to even get started with some basic data literacy. Do you have some resources or places that people could go to learn?
I don't have any published resources right now. I would say that there are, if you look at Coursera, there are some free resources from Google on there. There's some basic courses. I do work with companies directly in training staff and running some specific courses on AI foundations and literacy, right through to workshops on how that actually rolls into the experience design, etc. But that would be working with a specific company. So I think there's also TAFE has some basic AI foundations that are free as well. The thing I would encourage is that you really then apply it in the context of your business, because those generic courses are great. It's a great starting point, but the opportunity to actually consider where your value lies within the business and where your risk lies within your business is very different in a mortgage broking business to, a generic view of the world. So hopefully that helps.
Yes, and who knows, maybe you and I can come up with something for the people in brokering. Maybe we will create something that's, helpful. If anybody actually wants to have a course, comment below, let us know. And Simone and I might team up and help you and the teams create something so that you're aware of what's required across managing AI in your business. If people do want to reach out to you, Simone, where should they go? What should they do?
Just connect with me on LinkedIn is the best way. So Simone Blakers, Blakers. You'll find me there.
Perfect. Thank you. I really appreciate you making the time for this conversation. Again, if you have any more questions, feel free to reach out. We are here to help you optimize the way you work.
Awesome. Thanks, Katie.
Bye.